Hello everyone. So this is the third and final video lecture of week 10 and in this video we're going to take a look at the art and architecture in the Hittite Empire of the Anatolian Plateau. Hittites were a major power among the territorial states of Western Asia and North Africa during this, during the late Bronze Age, this extraordinary age of connectivity, diplomacy, and trade in the Eastern Mediterranean. In the previous lectures, we talked about this correspondence between various polities in the region, the diplomatic correspondence that documented in the Amarna archives. Hittite king seemed to be have a top status among all the kings, particularly leading role with the Egyptian pharaoh among all the kings. So had a very important political role. And Hittites and Egyptians were rivals in actually controlling the resources and trade networks in the Levantine coast and North Syria, particularly, which became, as you can see, the clustering of artifacts from the Uluburun shipwreck around in the Levantine coast. It became very famous with its metalworking workshops, ivory working workshops. Sort of really that's where a lot of raw materials and craft production really focused. And so Hittites and Egyptians were rivaling each other very much in trying to control the circulation of food. So it's a very economic concern. There was a battle, as I mentioned in the previous lecture, between the Egyptian pharaoh Ramses II and the Hittite king Muwatalli that took place in Syria in 1274 BCE. Hot in the sort of really heated moments within the late Bronze Age, and basically they were trying to kind of really get hold of the economic resources that were in Syria. We know that their royal families exchanged brides and grooms. There's a particular letter that was sent by the Egyptian pharaoh to the Hittite king, asking him to send one of his sons, because this Egyptian pharaoh didn't have a son, to continue his dynastic line. He wanted the Hittite king to send his son to become the new Egyptian pharaoh, which is really quite fascinating, and it shows the kind of really the intimate connection between these different dynastic families. So Hittite kingdom, whose history goes deep into the Middle Bronze Age, was the first political entity that unified the Anatolian plateau under a single political entity. And the kingdom based itself on a dense network of copper and silver mining, metal production, and trade in close connection with merchants from northern Iraq, from Assyria, and the Anatolian plateau really saw for the first time this kind of formation of an extensive urbanization and spread of literacy at this time also. I will talk about specifically two important sites. One is the capital city of Hattusha in the bend of the Holmes River. And then I will also take you to Flatunpınar and Yalburt, where there were a number of water monuments that are associated with the Hittite Empire. The Hittites participated in the literary cultures of the Mesopotamian world. They really wanted to see themselves, and they did see themselves as part of the Mesopotamian world, of this kind of cuneiform cultures. And so Sumerian, Akkadian, Hurrian, all of these languages were written and studied in Hattusha. But also local Anatolian Indo-European languages of Hittite and Luvian. So alongside the cuneiform writing, Hittites also adopted a hieroglyphic form of writing for their monuments, used to compose imperial narrative statements in Luvian. Here I'm showing you an image of Yalburt Yaylası's sacred pool complex and the hieroglyphic Luvian inscription of one of the last Hittite kings, Tutalya IV. And it's a monument that was raised just a few decades before the collapse of the Hittite Empire. Building a stone monument of a sacred pool, the Hittite king inscribed an account of his military expedition to southwest Anatolia, where he conquered territories who were rebellious to him and founded new cities. So this combination of a political statement into a religious ritual space is pretty typical of Hittite monuments, I'd like to say. This is a site that I've been doing fieldwork in the last several years. I'd love to talk to you more about it in the class. We're running as a team, we're running a landscape archaeology project in this region, particularly trying to understand the landscape dynamics, the politics of ecology around these water monuments, and trying to contextualize why these monuments were built where they were built. And so Hittites like to build stone monuments on natural springs and often embellished them with these imperial statements from the mouth of the rulers. And I think this really fascinating amalgamation of religion and politics is something that we will come back also. And I'm showing you sort of an overall image of this pool complex as it looks today. It's built on top of a pastoral landscape. We talked about pastoralism last week. This is actually, and I actually showed you a photograph from this site also last week, just to illustrate a kind of a pastoral settlement. The capital city of Hattusha, modern Boğazköy, transformed a dramatic rocky landscape filled with springs into a ceremonial state capital with its sacred gates and streets and sacred ponds and rock-cut shrines, stone temples, and other structures. Its layout was designed to accommodate Hittite urban festivals that are known to us from actual tablets, Hittite texts that are found in Hattusha itself. Here I'm showing you a plan of the city of Hattusha, which has been excavated by German archaeologists for over 100 years, in the last 100 years or so. And you see the fruit of all the excavated buildings that are marked on the city plan, which includes this Temple 1, this large temple complex in the city, as well as the citadel, Büyük Kale, where the palace of the Hittite kings actually was located, and the northern part of the city featured not only a large temple complex. So we mentioned this Temple 1, this large temple complex dedicated probably to the storm god, and we can sort of really talk more in detail about this building in our discussion on Thursday. And then we see the Büyük Kale, the fortress, and in the actually the southern part of the city, then we see a collection of several temples, most of them sort of really built in the 14th and 13th centuries BCE in the upper city, connected to each other with these three major gates: the Lion Gate, the Sphinx Gate, and the King's Gate, that form the sort of southern part of the city. And all these gates were actually sort of really ceremonial structures that are associated with particular Hittite festivals. And these ceremonial gates, in fact, really had either divinities and ancestor kings, sphinxes and lions that are carved into them, onto these kind of large monolithic blocks. And these, we believe that these gates were really, these three sort of significant gates were the organizing sort of architectural members within the urban landscape of the city, organizing the urban festivals as well. So, and you can see what is known as one of the King's Gate. You can see this kind of really carving, semi-sculptural, sort of high relief carving of the King's Gate, and it's really quite unclear who that king is, and it's probably some kind of an ancestor king that we are really talking about. And here he is restored on either side of the gate. And these gates actually really have also illustrates us this kind of massive cyclopean masonry that are associated with Hittite architecture, the sort of fitting, rough shaping of large boulders into this kind of really organically formed, well-knit architecture. And this cyclopean masonry is also found in Mycenaean sites in Greece, and so people have that are contemporaneous. So people have actually suggested that there is some kind of an architectural knowledge and craftsmanship that was being shared between the Hittites and the Mycenaeans. Finally, I'd like to sort of really take you to Yazılıkaya, which is an open-air rock-cut sanctuary and royal burial site right outside of the capital, Hattusha. It's about less than a mile in walking distance from the gates of the city. So the diverse communities of the empire were increasingly united by this festival calendar and state religion in Hattusha. So this is one way of bringing in sort of divinities, gods and goddesses from the countryside, from all these conquered territories, and sort of really housing them in the ceremonial capital was the Hittite way of really incorporating these diverse communities in the empire's territories. So this open sanctuary is actually, it is supposed to house 1,000 gods of Hatti. There are thousands of these gods, just because they're really all invited from the countryside to the capital city, and they're meant to really literally engage and kind of really come together in Hattusha in a great, what is called a great assembly, to actually take place here. The open-air sanctuary, known as Yazılıkaya, which is basically means inscribed rock. It's a natural sort of rock formation with a spring in it, with a former spring, not active these days, but in the Hittite period it was active. It was located about a mile east of Hattusha and was used as a ritual site during those festivals, acting as a visual manifestation of that kind of divine assembly. So in this rock formation, you enter first a major chamber, and you're seeing a plan of that chamber on the left and a picture on the right. And so representations of various deities walking in procession are carved in profile into long rows in the sides of these rock cliffs, and they converge. While the larger chamber was reserved for this assembly, so we're seeing these kind of registers of gods that are meeting, but there's some kind of a hierarchy of them as well. The second chamber, if you take a little offshoot, you can access a very narrow chamber called Chamber B, and this is where the dead ancestors lived, a kind of an access to this narrow chamber. And archaeologists have suggested that this chamber must have served as a burial chamber for dead Hittite kings. In one carving, the storm god and the sun goddess face each other in the center. Behind the sun goddess, to the viewer's right, stand their offspring. All of these figures, carved in low relief, stand in either literal or figurative mountains. You can see the personification of mountains on which the storm god is actually standing. And the sun goddess and her son stand on feline sort of animals who in turn stand on mountains themselves. So this is a very important sort of sanctuary site for the Hittites to control. So Eflatun Pınar, I want to finally take you to this very important site, Eflatun Pınarı, or Plato Spring, which is a Hittite spring monument in the Beyşehir Lake Basin, Konya province. So this is actually a frontier site, a southern frontier site for the Hittites. And they built a pool monument, a sacred pool monument on top of a natural spring where water is gushing out of the ground, out of the rock. Hittites built water monuments at springs, and these sites were considered to be very significant sites of communication with ancestors, because water comes out of the rock, out of the underground, and Hittites believed that the dead ancestors actually lived underground, and so these are points of contact with their ancestors. And so these sites were then used as places to sign treaties and make important decisions, because they wanted their ancestors to come up in these springs and sort of really be witnesses to these important historical events. The monument is built in the southern borderlands of the Hittite Empire, and its Turkish name literally means Plato's spring. Although the Greek philosopher Plato did not live until about 1,000 years later, the site's significance endured. So this was a site that was around all the time. It was not excavated by archaeologists, but it was around all the time. It always had water, and so the site provoked many new stories in later time periods as well. It consists of a large stone-built pool with a stone structure on the northeastern side. The carefully fitted blocks of the structure include a series of deities and fabulous creatures carved in relief, facing the pool in a symmetrical design. Centrally placed, although extensively eroded, are two seated deities, probably the storm god and the sun goddess of the earth, topped by winged discs. A West Asian symbol of royal power. The lowest course, standing in the water, consists of mountain deities who are mountain spring deities with dresses and crossed arms. You can see them in the very bottom. They have these kind of mountain skirts to them, and they have holes in their bellies, and water would spurt out of their bellies when it was running, and they have these crossed arms and kind of really standing, and so they're kind of really the foundation of this kind of really whole setup. So if you have these spring gods and goddesses in the bottom, sort of really holding the earth, and on top of them is the storm god and the sun goddess of the earth, sitting with their sun discs, and all these creatures who are carrying the earth. This then becomes a fascinating sort of cosmic representation of a mountain spring. It's basically, and it's fascinating because actually Flatumpunare is in the lowlands. And so what the Hittites are doing they're in a way recreating, in a kind of a mimetic architectural way, a mountain spring in a lowland context, which makes it even more fascinating. And so you want to imagine this site as some kind of a portal into the underworld, where particular rituals are performed to speak to the ancestors, to speak to the divinities who live in the underworld, who then come up and help with major decision-making processes. So I'm going to stop here, and there are a lot of really important things to talk about on Hittite architecture and stone masonry, but I wanted to sort of really give you a taste of it with this video lecture, and we will continue discussing in our Zoom session on Thursday. So thank you for listening.